It was considered the goal of the century with only 34 seconds left to go between Canada and the Soviet Union. Paul Henderson scored. He quickly gave Canada international recognition and became a household name. I'm Jamie Quinn. Coming up, I'll be speaking one-on-one with the hockey legend. Welcome to the show, Paul Henderson.
Good to be here.
You have a hockey career that spans more than 18 years, and you can't escape it. You're now a legend. Let's go back to the footage we just saw of that moment in 1972, September the 28th, you against the Soviets, the first ever Summit Series, and how were you feeling at the time?
Well, near the end of the game, I felt we needed to have a goal for certain. Do you want me to explain?
Take me the score. Give me the score. Tell me what you were thinking.
Okay. Well, it was getting near the end of the game. The score was tied 5-5, and word came down that the Russians were going to claim victory because if the game ended in a tie, each team would have won 3 games and 2 would have been tied. But they had scored 1 more goal than us, and so we needed to win the game to get the victory. And I actually yelled at Peter Mohavlich, the left winger, to come off the ice, jumped over the boards, saw that Yvon Cornway headed at the far boards, yelled at him. He threw it across, but it was a little too far in front of me. Defenseman tripped me. My speed carried me into the boards, and I remember thinking, yeah, I've still got enough time because I went through the whole team in the 7th game, and well, I can still score. Got up, and I saw Phil Esposito just took a whack at it at Tretiak. Tretiak should have covered it, but he didn't. I got the rebound, and I immediately tried to shoot along the ice into the corner. But he stopped that also, got it with his pad. But then he was down, and I had about a foot to put it in, and in panic mode, put it in the back of the net, and I've been celebrating for the last 32 years.
And that all happened in a span of, what you say, 30, 60 seconds?
I wasn't on the ice any more than 10 seconds. After I came over the board when I scored, probably about 10 seconds.
Wow. And we know that not only in the final game did you come through for the country and the team, but it was also in the last 2 before that, at very important moments.
I got on a little bit of a roll, obviously. Very fortunate, the right time at the right place, and yeah, it worked out pretty well for myself and Canada.
Now, going into that series, let's talk about how it was the first ever between Canada and Russia. And I've read some of your literature, and you said there's immense pressure there because hockey is a Canadian game, so you had to win.
We really wanted to dominate. The Russians had been winning at the Olympics, obviously using their best players, which they were all professional, really. And I was really getting sick of that, but they had never played the pros. And I really wanted to beat them all 8 games. I wanted to beat them 8-0 and send them back there, and they would never return, and just that we are the best. Don't be messing around with us as pros. But we found out very quickly that they were incredibly gifted, talented athletes. Their physical conditioning, we had never been exposed to physical conditioning like they had. And they had a team plan, and Tretiak was an incredible goaltender, and so they gave us everything that we could handle.
Is it surprising that you ended up pulling through for the team when at first you didn't even know if you'd make it on the team?
Well, it's one of those great situations. You never know when opportunity is going to knock, and I was really fortunate. I knew that Ronnie Ellis and I would be put together because we played together in the Toronto Maple Leafs, and they put us with Bobby Clark the first practice, and we clicked. We worked hard, obviously, and we had to work hard to make the team, and we did. And it turned out I really think we were Canada's best line. We were the only line that played all 8 games together. And fortunately, we were good at both ends of the rink, and we started scoring some goals. And in particular, I really got fortunate. I mean, I never ever thought in 100 years or never in any game thought about scoring the winning goal or being the hero. It just turned out wanting to win and being a part of a team, and just actually very fortunate being in the right time at the right place. Plus playing with the greatest hockey players in the world. With my game, I really felt the better hockey players I played with, the better I would be. because when you get into the open, they will get it to you, and my speed and my shot were my two biggest assets, and so it worked out very, very well.
I can imagine Bobby Clark, Ron Ellis, that you're probably still friends today.
Oh, sure. I mean, there's a common bond. Even all 35 guys.
Yeah.
There's just, when you see one of the guys from Team Canada, you know, it's just, we were one of the team that we went to war together and came through in the end.
Coming up, we'll be talking a little bit more about the weeks and the months that followed that win. Stay with us. You're watching One on One. Welcome back. I'm sitting one-on-one with Paul Henderson, hockey legend, 1972, September 28th, the moment that changed your life. Tell me about the weeks and months that followed after Team Canada beat the Soviets.
It was hectic. It was different. For us, I think my wife and I have been fairly private people, and certainly wasn't much privacy to it. Became, I guess, sort of you would call instant celebrity. In hindsight, I think I could have handled it better. But we had an owner of the Toronto Maple Leafs at that time by the name of Mr. Harold Ballard that I really felt that was decimating our hockey team. I mean, the WHA had raided our team. I didn't think that we had any chance to win the Stanley Cup, and I blamed Harold Ballard specifically for that. And so it was a very frustrating time in the sense that we had just won the greatest series in the world. I come back to play in the Toronto Maple Leafs where we had no hope of winning the Stanley Cup, and I really blamed him. In hindsight, I mean, I shouldn't have been that critical, but I was.
And why him in particular?
Well, we lost a lot of our players to the WHA, and it was just his arrogance for another $10,000 to $15,000. He could have kept 4 or 5 different hockey players that were critical to our success.
And could it be you weren't playing for a winning team anymore?
Well, that's right, and you know you don't. I mean, I knew that we couldn't compete against the Boston Bruins or the New York Rangers or the Montreal Canadiens. I mean, you can't clean out your whole defense and play in the NHL, and so it was very frustrating to come from such a high and then come back to a team that we knew would be life and death to make the playoffs.
And now I've read that you've said that during the weeks and months that followed, you had recounted and relived the story that you've relived again for us here, and you actually got sick of telling that for a point.
Well, that's right. I mean, it was such a, it was such an invasion on it. It all happened so fast. And then I think, particularly for myself, like I had this anticipation now that you'd go and play a game, and if it was tied at the end of the game, I felt incredible pressure to perform, to score. And I think there was anticipation, you know, in the fans. Well, he did it the 3 times over there. And so, you know, you just can't heap that kind of pressure on yourself and operate.
Yeah.
And so...
and without the camaraderie of the team as well, I'm sure you're playing for a team that wasn't winning, and maybe that can
Oh, sure. There was a whole bunch of things that came together to make it a very frustrating time in my life. Very frustrating.
So you fulfilled your boyhood dreams. You did what every Canadian young boy would like to do. You played in the NHL. You won in 1972. And you're angry, you're bitter, you're frustrated, you're unhappy. And I actually heard for a point in time you actually turned to drinking before you...
Well, I was pretty good at drinking before this.
Okay.
I think all hockey players like our beer. But probably when you're frustrated in that, then you drink a little more and you try to bury your sorrows.
Yeah.
And I was looking for answers, and I didn't know where to find them. And obviously alcohol is a wonderful way out. And nowadays people use drugs to escape from reality. And unfortunately, I probably turned to alcohol a little too much out of frustration. And
now, did that happen around the same time you actually made the decision to go to the WHA? I mean, you cursed Harold Ballard for sending or letting the teammates go, but meanwhile you decided to follow in their path.
Well, exactly. It came down to, well, they came, obviously, offered me twice the money. I was trying to negotiate a contract with him, and key on the whole works on him. And there was guys in the WHA that were not half a hockey player, were making more money than I was.
Okay.
And so I really didn't think that the Toronto Maple Leafs would ever win the Stanley Cup with Harold Ballard there. He owned the team, and so I made the decision also that, he was driving me crazy. And as much as I wanted to win the Stanley Cup, I just decided probably better to get out of here. And I had no regrets. One of the best things I ever did was get away from Harold Ballard and the Toronto Maple Leafs. And so did jump to the WHA, and unfortunately I didn't win the Stanley Cup, which I think is any young man's dream, as it was mine. So I had to give up on that dream. But
quickly, I'd like to touch on the fact that the WHA coming back into the circuit at this point in time, and how do you feel about that?
It'll be interesting to see if it gets off the ground. I am highly suspect it getting off the ground. Certainly if the NHL season starts within a month or two, I don't think they'll make it whatsoever. But hope springs eternal. I mean, they did it the last time to try to get a team in the NHL, and probably that's what they would try to do again, because the NHL will try to get rid of them, that's for sure.
Now, 1974 summit, again, back in Russia. Now the Soviet Union at the time, they were angry, and they said, this is our time to show them we're going to win. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, not as much success for Team Canada, or even personally as a hockey player, as you had during the first set. So how was that for you?
Well, it was a different situation. Billy Harris, who was our coach, we won and tied the first two games. We won one, tied one. We went into Winnipeg, and Billy decided that everybody that came out was going to play. And he put 8 new players into the lineup.
Oh.
There was no chance of us winning. You cannot take 8 players and put them in the lineup. And so at that point, it became a series of games, I think, for the, and that was management's prerogative in terms of the guys came to camp, and he said, if you come to camp and work, you will play. Mm-hmm. And so in the 8th game, or the 3rd game in Winnipeg, I mean, we got blown out. You just cannot make that kind of changes in a short series. And so the pressure was off at that point. I mean, it's going to be a series of games, and if we win, fine. If we don't, we didn't. And so I went over to Russia this time, and I didn't feel any pressure whatsoever. I enjoyed the museums, I enjoyed the country, I enjoyed a whole lot of things, but lost the intensity.
Well, coming up, I'd like to talk a little bit more about your life after hockey and some very big things that have changed you and changed those lives you've touched. All that and more coming up on One on One. Stay with us.
Local Matters on Rogers Television.
Wheels of the Week, with profiles of cars' interesting characteristics and unique accents.
Runners that go on the floor, they have hidden bolts. There's 69 bolts holding those runners down.
Discussions with owners on the history of their cars.
It was built on a Friday, December the 13th, 1968, a 69 model.
And the restoration process these owners had to do to make their cars shine again.
They did the cage on it, all the tin work, did the wiring.
So join Reg and Al Duggan on Wheels of the Week, Monday and Wednesday at 9 p.m.
Local Matters on Rogers Television, Dufferin Peel.
Welcome back. You're watching One on One. I'm sitting down with Paul Henderson, who's known most for scoring the ultimate goal, the goal of the century in 1972 in the Canadian game against the Soviets. But I'd like to talk a little bit now about how your life moved from hockey to something completely different. And I'd like you to introduce that instead of me because almost surprising.
Oh, very surprising even to me. I think that when I was going through that sense of frustration with the Leafs, and especially with Harold Ballard, I met a guy by the name of Mel Stevens who runs Teen Ranch up near Orangeville. And he really encouraged me to look at the spiritual dimension of life, specifically Christianity. And the guy had the patience of Job because he spent 2 years, spent hundreds and hundreds of hours with me, trying to help me get a grasp of who this Jesus was. And
Now, this is a man who actually brought Bibles to the Toronto Maple Leaf hockey team and dropped them off.
He had an inspiration to give the Toronto Maple Leaf Bibles. It was a beautiful gold leaf, leather-bound Bible, a maple leaf insignia on it, our names on it. I took it home and threw it on the shelf, never opened it for a year. And it was a year later that, out of frustration, I opened it, and his card was in there, and I ended up meeting the guy and started talking about the Bible. And, like where did this Bible come from? Is it real? Or who is this Jesus? And as much as I had never slowed down enough to really take a look at the spiritual dimension of life. And so this man helped me. I spent 2 years, and after 2 years of due diligence, I really became convinced that Jesus Christ was who he said he was. And in terms of came to earth, loved me so much that he even died for me. And so on March 12th, actually, of 1975, I became a follower of Jesus Christ, and mainly at the inspiration of Mel Stevens.
And you were still playing hockey at the time?
Oh yes, I had jumped to the WHA now, and I was playing for the Toronto Toros.
Did it go over well with your teammates?
Well, it was interesting. When the guys would be all by themselves, they would ask me questions. If there was a group, they didn't want to get caught to me one-on-one type of. But some of my best friends have, become Christians over the years. But I think in hindsight, Jamie, I think they should have locked me up for a year, because once I embraced Christianity and saw the changes, I was probably a little more aggressive and wasn't mature enough to know when to talk. And
so you're an evangelist almost.
I became just a little bit too aggressive. But one of my teammates came to me one day, and I can remember specifically, he says, Henry, you're really a good guy, but quite frankly, you're getting to be a monumental pain in the you-know-what.
Okay.
Just too aggressive. And I found, and I could see that I was. And so as you mature and grow, that you learn to back off, and when the time is right, you bring it up. And when it's not, you keep your mouth shut.
Now, how did you actually come to the decision to end your hockey career? I mean, they all do end at some point in time and decide to retire. I know it was 81, but what brought that event?
Well, actually, the NHL and the WHA merged. I was playing for the Birmingham Bulls. Toronto Toros became the Birmingham Bulls. I went over and played with the Atlanta Flames. And we were living in the South, but the Atlanta Flames were going to Calgary, and Cliff Fletcher offered me a 2-year contract. I could have gone to Calgary and played for 2 more years, and he said, you could be a part of the team. I'll teach you to be a part of the team. But I was 38. My wife and I talked about it, and we decided that we'd had enough. And so we really didn't want to move the family to Calgary. I had one girl in university at this point, and so we decided to hang it up. I'd played and had a good career, and so I decided that was, and I had no desire to stay in hockey afterwards, like to coach or be a part of a team. So the good news is I made the decision to retire, and I'd had enough, and I was 38. That was
and
it.
Before you retired, you went back and you beat the Leafs, right?
The
in
last
that Atlanta game.
The last game in Maple Leaf Gardens, I came in with the Atlanta Flames, and we beat the Leafs 5-3. I scored 2 goals, got an assist. I was first star of the game, and went down, and they came out, the first star, and Harold and King used to sit down in the corner, and nice to see you, Harold.
Yes.
And that was my swan song. So I went out with a blaze of glory my last game of Maple Leaf Gardens.
Well, you say you didn't go into coaching after retiring from a hockey career. However, in essence, you have actually become a coach. You're coaching business people, and you have your own ministry, I understand. And you're teaching people how to order their lives around biblical principles. And these are people in the business world. Mm-hmm. How does that work?
Well, Jamie, after I finished hockey, I went to seminary in the States. And
you studied?
Yes, studied for a few years to get some training. And I was in a great church in Birmingham, Alabama when there. And the pastor took me under his wing, and I was mentored. And I actually had a businessman that got me into a group of 8 other guys, and we used to meet weekly, and very successful people. And we talked about, of how you integrate spirituality in your life 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. talked a lot about being husbands and fathers, and it changed my life incredibly. I mean, I woke up to biblical principles that I wasn't even aware of, and then applied them even to my hockey career, to my marriage, to friendships. And then when I came back after I finished seminary, we couldn't stay in the States. The Lord closed the doors. And so I really felt that the Lord was saying to me, Paul, I want you to go to successful Canadians and share what you have learned. And so I started with 3 men back in 1985, 86. And now we've got over 600 men. We've got about 80 groups that meet weekly. And basically that's what I am. I'm a spiritual coach, really.
Yes.
In encouraging, asking people the right questions. And then, like Mel asked me a bunch of questions that I didn't have answers for. And then encouraging people to really stop to think about being a husband, a father. And like I say that if you're married to, like I don't want a woman in the world to be ever loved more than my wife. I want my wife to be loved and cherished and nurtured. And I've been married almost 42 years, and she
no wonder
lights
you're
my
still
fire.
married, I'm sure. And I'm sorry to have to cut you off, but I'd like to talk a little bit more about that when we come back. And we'll also be discussing how you've, in fact, been immortalized. There's a postage stamp as well as a commemorative coin in your honor. Welcome back. We're sitting down with hockey legend Paul Henderson. Paul, I understand that you also started your own ministry, and like you said a few moments ago, you have hundreds of members. Most of those members, I believe, are men. And why is it that you decided to target men in your vision?
Well, I had a wife and 3 daughters, and I still don't understand women.
Okay.
I understand men. I understand their fears, and I really think that, that I was called to have a ministry to men. And I think that there's certain things that, like women will intimidate men. And I think that you need to find a place where men can be open and vulnerable. Like a guy's never going to say, like I'm really struggling with lust, or I'm really struggling with pornography if there's another woman in the room.
Okay.
And so it's more of a helping guys that can be open and show that you can that we all have fears or disappointments. And
Do you think men respect you more because you were a jock and they are someone that they do respect in one sense, and now in another sense they think, well, he's got to be kind of cool?
Well, I think a lot of men will come out initially because they're interested in hockey. I'll come and I'll hear Paul Henderson speak once. But obviously there's got to be more there to keep people coming back. There's got to be some substance. There's got to be something there that meets their needs. And so initially there's no question that to open doors, because most men want to talk about the goal. Oh, I was in high school, or I was in public school, or I dreamt about being. So there, obviously, I think I've utilized that fame pretty well to opening the door.
And it works.
Certainly, yeah.
Now, you said once when you see businessmen get serious about serving God and having their lives transformed, and you watch as they become better leaders, better husbands, better fathers, that's what gets you excited.
I can honestly say I've never seen a man yet that's really embraced the spiritual dimension of life that didn't become a better husband, a better father, and even a better businessman in a lot of ways. And so, like, there's no downside in this. And I look at my own life. Like in these areas, I'm totally different. And the good thing about it is that you learn to live lightly and you learn to live freely. You learn to live with gratitude, like every day is a gift, I really believe, from God. And so there's a wonderful anticipation of tomorrow and what might happen. But, it's amazing, Jamie. I find the older I get, the more I help other people, and the more opportunities I take to help somebody else, at the end of the day, I feel better about myself. It's almost, the Bible says if you want to get, give. And so you give to get. Even a smile. It's a biblical principle. So that's why we talk about biblical principles.
I want to talk a little bit about your book, Shooting for Glory, by Paul Henderson. It takes you back to the time you actually played in those hockey games, but you're looking at those games from a new perspective. In this book, you also talk about your new calling and your new ministry. And I read something in here that says a woman once wrote you a letter and told you that she saved or you saved her marriage during a time when you weren't even involved in your ministry.
No, it was so ironic. It was in '72, and it was September 28th, and her and her husband had not been getting along, and they were going to get divorced. He came to their house. He had moved out, came to their house with the divorce papers. It was just the start of the third period, and he asked her if he could come in and watch the third period, because they were both hockey fans. And she said, okay. He came in. They didn't say a word to one another. Phil scored, a little bit of cheering. Cornway scored, got into it. When I scored, they both went crazy, jumped up, and they found themselves hugging each other just because they were proud Canadians. And they looked in each other's eyes, and she said, you know, we realized that we did love one another. And we sat down and talked about it. And she said, and she wrote me this letter at Christmas time, and she says, Paul, you've given me the best Christmas present in the world. Had you not scored that goal, my husband probably I would have signed those papers and walked out, and I'd be divorced today. But because you scored, we embraced each other and started cheering, and we put our marriage back together. That was one of the most satisfying letters I've ever received in my life.
And maybe the first of many saved
That's
marriages
right, exactly.
within your ministry.
Because I was still lost as a goose then. You know, I had no spiritual dimension to my life at all in '72.
So now you're playing golf in your spare time. You're teaching at sports camps. You're involved in quite a few other things as well. And how do you like it?
It's been very good. I am very, very fortunate guy. I've been able to do a lot of things for charities. Obviously, try to raise some money for Muskoka Woods Camp and Teen Ranch. I involved with the Sick Kids Hospital. And so the wonderful thing about being a little bit of a celebrity, you get to do a lot of really neat things. And so I'm very fortunate, live in the wonderful city of Mississauga, and so it's not all bad.
You married your high school sweetheart. You have 3 beautiful daughters, 4 grandchildren.
6 grandchildren.
6 grandchildren.
6 grandchildren.
Well then, I guess that will give you lots to keep you busy.
You've got that right.
Well, thank you very much, Paul, for being here and speaking with us today. You've been watching One on One here on Rogers Television. I'm Jamie Quinn. Join us next week when we sit down with NHL referee legend Bruce Hood.